Good morning, everyone. We want to give Captain Solomon as much time as we can, and also for your questions at the end. I would remind you of two things. One, after this session at 10:30, right behind us at the Lakeside Women's Club, we'll have an opportunity for those of you who'd like to come and just have a little more focused, intimate question time with Captain Solomon for about 45 minutes. And then tonight at 7 o'clock, weather permitting, we will be at the bandstand. I think it's going to hold and we're going to be good. But at 7 o'clock at the bandstand, Captain Solomon will be bringing the homily for our evening vespers, so you don't want to miss that. I will say tomorrow, just as a prep for those of you who may be interested, I'll be leading a lunch and learn on the biblical models of freedom in keeping with our independence celebration. That'll be at 11:30 at the train station tomorrow. All right, let's open with a word of prayer and get you rolling. Holy God, we thank you so much for just bringing us together to hear from our brother. We pray that you would anoint him and give him your holy unction in the Spirit. Give us hearts and ears to hear. In Christ's name we pray. Amen.
Good morning. For those of you I've not had the pleasure of meeting, I am Nathan Solomon, Preacher of the Week, as you may have already guessed. A little bit about myself, if you're new, I am a Navy chaplain. I've been a chaplain for 27 years. I am endorsed for military chaplaincy by the Cooperative Baptist Fellowship. It's a small denomination of Baptist. And currently, I serve as the U.S. Fleet Forces Chaplain in Norfolk, Virginia. I say kind of because my family and I are in transition. I just finished a 3-year tour serving as the Naval Forces Europe and Africa and U.S. 6th Fleet Chaplain in Naples, Italy. It's hard duty. But we're in transition. I start for real at Fleet Forces next Monday. But for now, I am delighted to be here and talk a little bit with you all about the subject of faith in combat. Before I do, I want to revisit a little bit of what I talked about yesterday during the podcast interview. How many of you were here during the podcast? So a number. One of the questions I received towards the end of the session asked about what was the cost, the burden, the opportunities placed on my family and the family of our sailors and Marines. And I tried to answer for my family somewhat unsuccessfully. And that usually happens when I speak on behalf of other people. And my daughter told my wife yesterday that, yes, there was a burden to it. And she said, it always seemed awful in the moment when we were moving from place to place, when we were the kids were being pulled out of school and moved across the country and missing friends and family. But when you have a little time to reflect and look back on it, she was very grateful for all the opportunities that she had and the friends she's made across the world and the experiences that she had. And I think that's an important corrective to what I was trying to say. So there you go. All right. Start with a story. On June 17th, 2017, the guided missile destroyer USS Fitzgerald was at sea, about 60 miles southwest off the coast of Yokosuka, Japan, which is close to Tokyo. It was the middle of the night. It was about 1:10 in the morning. So on a destroyer at sea in the middle of the night, actually most people are asleep. there are watchstanders throughout the ship. About a third of the crew is awake and at work. 2/3 are asleep. You can keep a fairly good circadian rhythm on a destroyer, unlike an aircraft carrier where operations are 24 hours a day. So about 2/3 of the crew is asleep. They're not too far out of port, it's only 60 miles. It's just after midnight. And the officer of the deck. The officer of the deck is the officer on the bridge of the ship who acts with the authority of the commanding officer when the commanding officer is not on the bridge. And she sees a container ship that's about 5 times larger than the Fitz moving towards each other. And she gives an order to change the rudder, so steer to the left, and increase the speed so they will pass in front of the ship. Part of the order doesn't get executed the way that it should, and at about 1:17 that morning, the container ship and the Fitz collided. Remember that I told you the container ship is about 5 times larger. The Fitz and all our destroyers weigh about 7,000 tons, which sounds big until you know that the container ship weighed 30,000 tons, which is about the size of an aircraft carrier during the Second World War. The collision caved in the Fitz's starboard side amidship. So if you look at the ship, it's on the right side, starboard, about in the middle of the ship. And the container ship had this big protrusion under the water that helps it move more efficiently. It's kind of like a spear that goes forward. It's called a bulbous bow. And that bulbous bow caved in Fitz's starboard side below the waterline, and seawater began pouring into the ship in the middle of the night, including 2 berthing spaces where sailors were asleep, 2 levels below the water. Cold seawater just begins to pour into the ship. Berthing in a Navy ship at night, or oftentimes during the day, you go in, there's just a dim red light because people are sleeping 24 hours a day. Those lights go out immediately. Battle lanterns come, so it's like the little emergency lighting, and there's just black seawater pouring in. When it comes in, it's like a waterfall coming in, and it picks up everything. So suddenly, in the blackness of the ice-cold water, because it's February, the water's swirling around. It's picking up mattresses, pillows, people's combs and brushes, the book you were reading, curtains that cover your rack, and it's swirling around in the blackness in the dark. And within less than a minute after the collision, the water's waist deep in berthing. And just about 30 seconds later, it reached the overhead, the ceiling. And Fire Controlman First Class Gary Ream Jr., he's down there. It's his berthing section, right? He's 37 years old. He's almost been in the Navy for 20 years. He's close to retirement. He's senior. And he's the senior man in berthing. And the first thing that he does is he rolls out of his rack, that's what we call the bed, and there's a sailor that's trapped under a locker that's fallen over. He frees that sailor, gets him to the ladder, and gets him up and out of the compartment. He goes back. Water's almost to the roof now. The ship is beginning to list because it's taking on so much water. At the ladder, where Gary got that first sailor who was trapped, there are 2 sailors there, and they pull him out to safety, right? And the water is still coming up. Now somebody else comes up through the water, gasping for breath. They reach out and grab that one. He's with Gary. Gary dives back down, goes into the water. He does this like 3 more times. Gary just keeps going back down into the water. And then the flooding reaches the top of the hatch. And a ship works together. A ship lives and dies, not by individuals, but what the crew does together. And everybody knows what you have to do. The water's at the top of the hatch. You gotta close the hatch. You gotta close the hatch, and you gotta seal Gary in and whoever is left in there, or you're gonna lose the ship. So they sealed the hatch. And Gary was one of 7 people who drowned in that compartment. His was the last body found in the wreckage when divers were able to go into the compartment. It was as far back as you could get in the compartment, and it was jammed between a door. And just by what the investigators found, they assumed that in his last moments, Gary was still going backwards into the wreckage to see if he could find more people. And that's where he died. So, why did he do that? What gives someone like Gary Beam, fire controlman first class, the courage to do something like that? Gary's been in the Navy for a minute. He knows that the flooding is reaching the overhead, the ceiling, right? He knows what happens when it reaches the hatch. You sealed the hatch, right? What gave Gary the courage, the initiative to do what he did at the cost of his life? So you, all of you, taxpayers, the Navy spends oceans of your money. I mean, we spend a lot of it, right? With the idea, or with the priorities of providing me and my fellow sailors and Marines the best ships, the best aircraft, the best weapons, and the best training that we can do. That's what your money goes to. I'm grateful for it because it's a philosophical orientation of the United States to, I don't know how else to put it, but we would rather spend dollars than blood, right? There are 2 ways to win wars, right? The Russians lacking the ability to technologically overwhelm the Ukrainians, just keep sending people to die, right? That's kind of the Russian way of war. We don't do that. We're like, if we can create, a certain weapon system, a certain capability, that we can deploy when we have to, then maybe we don't have to send so many of our sons and daughters, into harm's way. So I'm grateful that we do things that way. And we spend a ton of money thinking about readiness. Right? We don't know how the fight will go when combat actually starts. So the whole orientation of the military, not just the Navy, but the Marine Corps, the Air Force, the Coast Guard, and the Army, we spent a lot of time thinking about how ready we are for what we're going to do. Right? And if you talk to any commander, anyone who is in charge at any level in the U.S. military, what keeps them up at night is readiness. Are my ships ready? Are my people ready? Can I launch the aircraft right now? What's the maintenance look like? How many Tomahawk missiles do we have? If we have to shoot them, do we have them? Will they go out of the tube? Do the people who are in charge of maintaining them know how to fix them? Did they get the right training? Are we ready? And we break this down into several different categories. Talk about medical readiness, right? Medical readiness is a thing. Everyone in the military has to go through multiple physicals, receive lots and lots of shots, right? We have physical exams every year. There are always spreadsheets that come out multiple times a year. It's like, oh, Chaplain Solomon, it is time for you to go get your, anthrax vaccine. Like, if you don't go, we're going to stop paying you, right? So that kind of stuff happens all the time. We're obsessed about medical readiness. Are our people healthy enough to go into harm's way and not be sidelined, by, a lower back injury, right? We're obsessed about things like dental readiness too. Like, we won't send people deployed on a ship, like if you have problems with your wisdom teeth, right? We have to be reasonably sure that you're not going to have like a major dental problem when you're out at sea. Like, commanders actually have to think about this. We talk about physical readiness. I may not look it, but they do insist that we exercise on a regular basis. We have physical fitness tests, twice a year. And depending on what your job is, there may be extra physical fitness tests in addition. Like, the Marine Corps has a very high standard for physical fitness tests. The Navy, a little less so. And at my age, the standards are just shockingly low. But the idea is to prepare people like me to be ready to execute my job in harsh conditions, to go without sleep for extended period of time, to pull my fat body up through an escape hatch if the ship begins to sink. Physical readiness. That's why we exercise so much. Can you carry the weight? Can you keep going? Right? So physical readiness and medical readiness, they're like baselines. You can't do anything else unless you're healthy and fit. And we talk a lot about material readiness, and I mentioned some of this before. Material readiness is like, hey, is the ship ready to go to sea? Is it rusting? Do we need to refuel the nuclear reactor in the submarine? Right? Those things, that's material readiness. Do we have enough toilet paper? I mean, that's a thing. You know how much toilet paper a carrier uses? It's a lot. Like, it would stagger you how much toilet paper, an aircraft carrier, 5,000 people gone for 10 months. I mean, enough toilet paper to fill this room, right? That's a lot. So that's material readiness. Because if you don't have enough toilet paper on the carrier in combat, suddenly you've got a public health hazard and the ship can't fight. And that, multi-billion-dollar platform, which you all paid for, right, is combat ineffective. So things like toilet paper, it matters too. That's material readiness. And then we talk about training readiness. Are we training our sailors to be able to do what they need to be able to do in combat, right? Just for example, I spent time as a chaplain for a Marine infantry battalion. My Marines, 2nd Battalion, 8th Marines, they spend an incredible amount of time at the shooting range, shooting hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of rounds. breaking down their weapons, cleaning them, putting them back together, shooting more and more and more. Because they're infantrymen, right? If you don't know how to shoot, you're not going to be very good at your job, right? So we spend a lot of time training our people how to do the job that the nation is going to ask them to do at the risk of their life. So they have to be healthy. They have to be physically fit. We have to give them stuff that works, and they have to know how to use it. Even with chaplaincy, readiness for combat operations is an obsession. I just came from a conference in Colorado Springs where we spent, senior leaders of the Navy Chaplain Corps spent a good deal of time talking about the readiness of our chaplains for combat operations in an era of drone warfare. How does it change chaplaincy? How do we move around the battlefield? Right? Because we have to move around the battlefield, right? In any fight that looks kind of like the fight the Russians are having with the Ukrainians, right? We won't be sending chaplains via helicopter like I did in Afghanistan. We won't be radioing ahead because, radios are deaf. You can't move in a group of more than one or two people because that's a death sentence. So how are we going to do this? We spent a lot of time talking about that. Right? How are we going to move our chaplains under fire so we're ready when combat happens, right? We have to think about that now. So we're, even chaplains who most people wouldn't think, spend a lot of time thinking about, hey, how ready are you for combat? Well, we do. And we also spend huge sums of money, not nearly as much as on the other side, caring for those who, as Abraham Lincoln said, who have borne the battle. In the Civil War, if you were wounded on the battlefield and you actually made it to a hospital, you still had about a 1 in 5 chance of dying of your wounds. That's even if you made it to the hospital, right? 20% chance of still dying. Today, that chance is about 1 in 80. If we get you off the field, you're almost certainly going to live. Doesn't mean there won't be physical consequences to your wound, but your chances of dying have gone down to just slightly more than 1%, which is remarkable. In combat operations in Afghanistan, the time between one of my Marines being wounded by an IED or gunshot wound, the time between the event and their extraction out of the zone was sometimes as short as 10 minutes. Like from the time someone shot until the helicopter is landing under fire and we're loading the Marine on and in surgery, like sometimes less than 20 minutes from the time they were hit till they're on the table. It's remarkable how well we've done with that. So that's why we have driven down the chances of our sailors and Marines dying. And we do a lot of frontier advancements in rehabilitation and clinical mental health, not to mention multiple mental health programs that exist below the clinical level. One sterling example is what the Marine Corps calls the Wounded Warrior Program, in which the Marine Corps has dedicated people whose only job it is to help wounded Marines navigate life even after the Marine Corps, living with Marines, coordinating their care, working on their VA benefits, helping them find training that they need to either go back in to the Marine Corps post-wound or transition to civilian life. One of the best stories I've ever seen about this was I had an armorer in Afghanistan, Sergeant Broadstreet. He was a veteran of the Fallujah fight in Iraq, he had gone through the Wounded Warrior Program, returned to active duty, was an infantryman. He had to change to being an armorer because he had a prosthetic leg. But he was still an active duty Marine and could still run 3 miles in less than about 19 minutes with the prosthetic leg. Yeah, Marines, right? Raw. I love them. God bless their little hearts. But beside all of this, all these other categories of readiness, we don't spend much time talking about readiness of the spirit. We don't spend a lot of time talking about readiness of the soul. We can ensure all the other categories, medical, physical, training, materiel readiness, are up to snuff. But that's not why Marines run to the sound of the guns. And the training and the physical fitness and how good your teeth are, that's not why Gary Ream kept going back down into a floating compartment. That's a matter of the soul. Now, some of you might be familiar. There's an old saying that there are no atheists in foxholes. Have you heard that before? Right? This is a common saying. I have a lot of problems with it because I've met atheists in foxholes. But I'm willing to bet that you don't know the origin of the saying. So here's another story. On November 6, 1914, the newspaper, Regional One, Western Times of Southwest England, published an account of a funeral for a soldier of the First World War at the parish church of St. Matthias in the village of Torquay. And during the service, the priest who was officiating, he read a letter that the deceased soldier's chaplain had written back to the community. It says, "Tell the soldiers preparing to come over that they must know God before they come to the front if they would face what lies before them. We have no atheists in the trenches. Men are not ashamed to say that, though they have never prayed before, they pray now with all their hearts." That's not really a surprise. It's such a pithy little saying from a chaplain. There are no atheists in the trenches. No wonder in the Second World War, it morphs to there are no atheists in foxholes, and it became a saying in our popular culture. It says a great deal about how horrible war is, if not really much about actual faith. But the point of the chaplain's letter that I'm interested in is the line that came right before him. They must know God before they come to the front. Another story. In a national radio broadcast, back when that was a thing, 30 years later in 1944, the commander of the U.S. Pacific Fleet, Admiral Chester Nimitz, talking about the war in Japan to the home front, says, "To wage this war, America has turned out the best weapons, material, and equipment, of which our advances in technology are capable. Many months have been spent in training our citizen army and navy in the use of these weapons. Every effort has been made to harden the muscles of our fighting men, increasing their ability to accomplish their difficult task. But even the finest weapons and the skill to use them and the stamina to keep them in sustained use, that's not enough. To these there must be added a spiritual armament to give the strength born of simple faith and the ultimate triumph of Christian ideals through the world." Now it sounds like it was written in the 40s, but Admiral Nimitz knew what he was talking about. It's like he recognized at that point in the war, after Coral Sea, after Midway, after Guadalcanal, after Tarawa, and the bloody battles in the Gilberts, like Yeah, we'll give our people the best stuff and best training we can get, but that's not enough. That's not enough to get them to charge out when the landing ramp drops on a defended beach. That's not enough to keep my gun crews in their tubs during the attacks of Japanese kamikazes. It requires a strength of spirit. And it has to happen before the battle. What is spiritual readiness? It's inner strength that we get from being connected to a higher purpose. It's what gives meaning and purpose and value to life. It's a connection with the divine, and it is, and this is really critical, it's immersion in a community of faith. That's what spiritual readiness looks like. If people, our sailors, our Marines, our airmen, Coast Guardsmen, soldiers, they come out of a community in which they are anchored in something of higher purpose, they're much more able to bear the battle and to return with honor. And if necessary, as one of my Marine commanders put, die with a happy heart. That's what spiritual readiness looks like. And that's what the Chaplain Corps is involved in doing. These are dangerous times. Because, as I mentioned in my sermon on Sunday, participation in religious communities has been on the wane, has been declining. And that comes with a lack of spiritual formation, a lack of grounding in things of ultimate meaning that give us the intestinal fortitude to do hard things and to bear them. And as I was reflecting on that a little bit this morning, that's kind of why the Lakeside model, the Chautauqua model, is so important, to provide, even in temporary gatherings, right? Temporary combinations of people throughout the summer, the chance to live in community, to talk about things of ultimate meaning, to go back and play shuffleboard, and for you to say to the person next to you, that Solomon guy was full of crap, but he really made me think, right? That kind of thing is what builds the readiness our people need to manage hard times. Not just sailors and Marines, but you. It's what you do in daily practice. It's your connection with community, a community of meaning and purpose and value, right? A higher purpose that anchors us to be able to do hard things. One of my mentors, and you know you've become very old when all your mentors are retired, he told me at one point, he says, Nathan, you know what a conscientious objector is, right? And you probably do too. A conscientious objector is someone for whom their moral and ethical core tells them, I can't participate in the fight. I couldn't be a part of the military. That's what a conscientious objector is. We have them, even in the all-volunteer force. It's a little different. The bar is high. You have to kind of prove your commitment to being a conscientious objector over time. You can't get out tomorrow and say, you know what, this kind of sucks. I object. I'm getting out. That doesn't work that way, right? But Bob, my mentor, he said, that implies 3 other categories. It implies an unconscientious objector, right? These are people who get into disciplinary problems, right? These are the people who get in fights, who drink and drive, who don't show up for work on time. They're objecting. They just haven't thought about it very much, right? Those are unconscientious objectors. Right? He goes, but it also implies someone who is an unconscientious server. Someone who doesn't have a really good, strong moral or ethical core, but they show up and do their job. Maybe they say, the bonuses the Navy is paying to run a nuclear reactor are really a lot of money. And it is. I just want to do that. I'm looking for extra money. I want to travel the world. Some people say, hey, I joined the Marine Corps because I wanted to kill people, right? That's unconscientious service. They don't get into trouble, but there's no moral or ethical weight to them. And it implies a fourth category, conscientious service. People who serve in the military, and it is partly motivated out of their moral and ethical core. I owe something to you because you're a fellow citizen and I have the capability to serve. That's conscientious service. It is the job of Navy chaplains, all military chaplains, to turn all of our servers, everyone who serves, into conscientious servers or objectors. I don't care which. I want you to have a moral and ethical core. And if your moral and ethical core leads you to say, I can't do this, mission accomplished, right? Won't be many, so it doesn't really bother me, right? I care about the state of the soul of my sailors and Marines, because if I can lead them in some way into engaging of things of meaning and purpose and value, connection with the divine, and it could be Judaism, it could be Islam, it could be something else, connect with it, right? That higher purpose, then I know if my commander has to send them into a flooding compartment where they will die when they shut the hatch, that they will be ready for it. That is the role of faith in combat. That is spiritual readiness. It has a great deal to offer us as Christians, as citizens in a republic who send our sons and daughters, husbands, wives, brothers and sisters into the service. And it is the key to doing hard things and returning with honor. All right, with that, please, we're going to take some time for questions. It can be on anything I just talked about or really anything else. I am delighted to answer any questions. Kimberly or somebody over here.
Thank you so much for your presentation. Occasionally in the general media, certain issues in the military kind of bubble up to general consciousness. I'm thinking of mental health and suicide rates, and I'm wondering if you could address that a little bit. I assume that maybe you're working with psychologists and psychiatrists, or the chaplains would also work with medical professionals to on programs to address those issues. Thank you. Both for active and apparently also people after they get out.
Mm-hmm. Yes. As I mentioned a little bit before, we have a whole suite of services: mental health, medical, chaplaincy, civilian resources to aid our sailors and Marines who struggle with mental health issues, including suicide, and it is continually it's an ongoing crisis, right? Because of the position I'm in, I'm copied on the message that's sent to the Secretary of the Navy and the Chief of Naval Operations every time one of our sailors or Marines dies. On average, about twice a week, a sailor or Marine dies by suicide. That's a lot. It's not as much as you think. It feels like a lot when you see the messages coming through, but we're about close to a million people in the Department of the Navy, between the Navy and the Marine Corps. So it remains a small percentage, but it's a problem, right? One that the Navy and the Marine Corps, Department of the Navy, because for my Marines in here, the Marine Corps is part of the Navy. It's a crisis we are continually addressing. Now, for the Chaplain Corps, our part in this, we call it, back during the Iraq and Afghanistan war, we spent a lot of time as a military trying to figure out how to defeat improvised explosive devices, IEDs, right? And we would talk about the research and the work we were doing as left of boom. Like if you think of a timeline, where the boom is the bomb going off, what can you do before that to either make the effects smaller or to avoid it or defeat the device or see where it is before that? Chaplaincy, yes, we do a lot of post-event care for people. But right now, we are more focused on left of boom stuff. We are more focused on trying to find ways to connect our sailors and Marines and embed them into communities of meaning, purpose, and value. I teased this a little bit in the sermon I preached on Sunday, but there are two centers for human flourishing, one at Harvard and one at Duke, who have been researching for about 20 years now the effect of religious faith on human resiliency and flourishing. And all of the research demonstrates that there is nothing even remotely comparable as a preventive factor for someone taking their own life or substance abuse than religious faith and participation in a religious community. It is incredibly effective because the Navy is made up of a bunch of nerdy engineers and they like their data. The Chaplain Corps has been working very, diligently with Navy leaders. Say, we need to focus on left of boom. We need to find ways to better connect our sailors, with communities of faith, not pushing a specific faith on people, right? That's unconstitutional. But I can really suggest that you connect with a faith tradition because you will be better for it. So I hope that answered the question. Next, anyone? Yeah.
Thank you for your description of spiritual formation and readiness, which I think was very, very helpful. Would you think, or would you believe that that is a widely shared perspective among the military personnel today?
Yeah, thank you for that question. It's something that we have begun to see success with in the military among our leaders. And what I'm talking about is it is the job of the Chaplain Corps also to help our leaders use the language of spiritual readiness when they address people like Congress, the sailors in their command, dependents. A lot of our leaders, understandably and for very good reason, right, are very reluctant to talk about matters of faith or to commend religion in public remarks, because it's kind of a live wire. We got this First Amendment thing going, right? What the language of spiritual readiness allows our leaders to do, I just came from, Naples, Italy. The commander there, 4-star Commander Admiral George Wyckoff, is a very devout Roman Catholic. He can stand in front of 500 or 600 sailors and say, I draw strength, I draw an ethical core, I'm able to get up in the morning because of my Roman Catholic faith. Right? That gives George Wyckoff the strength to do what he does, right? And then he has the freedom to say, that might work for you, right? But for me, a life of faith is how I do my job, and I encourage you to connect with your higher purpose. Most people do that through religion, but you can do it in other ways. Right? He can say those kind of words. It's not a violation of the First Amendment to say that connecting with a higher purpose and communities of meaning and value make you stronger in your moral and ethical core, because he's not endorsed a specific religion. So we've worked very hard on the language that our leaders, our non-chaplain corps leaders, can use to talk about the importance of this. So most of our leaders have been excited about the prospect of what connection with the divine, meaning, purpose, value can do, but they begged us, like, chaps, please give us language that we can use and feel confident that we're not going to get in legal trouble for doing it. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah.
Thank you for your remarks. I am curious as to how you and your fellow officers deal with some of the controversial issues that are flying around in the world today, particularly in terms of how women and different ethnicities are treated in the military and what their status is. You must have to deal with that at times.
There are all kinds, right, of political issues and cultural issues that swirl about in the United States, no secret, right? And there are a lot of things that, in about 3 years from now when I retire, about the military that I will be delighted to leave in the rearview mirror, right? And amen from my family. But we do a much better than average job of actually being a meritocracy. If you're good at your job, you're going to advance. As the song I learned in Baptist Sunday School, red, yellow, black, and white, they're precious in His sight. I mean, come on. If you're good at your job, you will advance in the United States Navy. And we tend in the Navy or in the military to kind of pride ourselves on being apolitical, right? Sometimes it's hard, right? I just came from a job in which I worked with my NATO allies on a daily basis. So it's a little challenging, right? I did get a really rude text from a Belgian chaplain last night, after the World Cup game. But consistently, we swear an oath to support and uphold the Constitution, right? We talk about morality and ethics, both in faith-based and secular settings within the military, because we know that one of the pillars of our republic is an apolitical military. You know, we're not as apolitical as we used to be. You know, one of my favorite fun facts is that both George S. Patton, Chester Nimitz, and Dwight D. Eisenhower never voted in an election until they were out of service, right? They thought voting was too much of a political compromise, right? So not as good as we once were, but that ethic is strong, and I think it holds. All right, other questions? Right behind you, Kimberly.
Can you share how burial services are handled in war versus peace in the military?
Yeah, that's, I mean, it's not an easy job, but it's an easy question. I'm going to draw you into a larger discussion right now. So if someone dies in combat right now, like my Marines in Afghanistan. In fact, I was on the phone with one of my chaplains day before yesterday. We lost a helicopter in the Gulf of Oman off the carrier Harry S. Truman. 3 crewmen survived, 1 didn't, right? So what happens at that point is once it's determined that the service member has died, they create a report called a personnel casualty report, and then we do what's called a casualty assistance call, right? In which 2 people, one of them being a chaplain, go to the next of kin, the parents, the spouse, to tell them that their loved one has perished. We always do it in person. I've done it 17 times, right? It's not easy, as you might imagine. But this is what, like the contract between Americans and its military. It's like if you send your son or daughter, your husband, your wife, your brother and sister to serve, that we will honor that sacrifice, right? You'll never get a telegram. We won't tell you, over the phone. We won't knock on your door in the middle of the night. We'll tell you in person, and we'll walk through with it. And then based on what the family needs after that, how they want to do a funeral, or we'll support them. Buried in the family cemetery in Mohawk, Tennessee, we'll do that. Buried in Arlington National Cemetery, we'll do that. But the commitment is to walk with the family through the process. You probably already figure out the problem with this. At the very height of the Vietnam War, KIA, killed in action, rates were, on average over the whole course of the war, about 3 people a day were dying. It went way up in the middle of the war, but over the course of the whole war, it was about 3 people a day. Sometimes more, sometimes less. We can handle that, right? We can handle that. The fight that we're trying to get ready for, we talk about a pacing threat. Who is like us that if we got into a fight with them, it would be, Ali and Frazier, it'd be a heavyweight bout? It's the Chinese, right? And the Chinese are very capable military. So in our exercises, we know if something like that happened, we've got to be prepared for 2,000 or 3,000 at once. If the Chinese Navy were able to sink one of our aircraft carriers, it's 5,000 people, right? Gone in an instant. We're not ready for that, right? We can't do it. We can't notify people with an officer and a chaplain. Like, there are 879 Navy chaplains right now. All of us. Most of them in a conflict will be forward on ships out at sea, so not available to do the casualty call that we've done since the Vietnam War. So we're in the midst of trying to figure out our job, readiness as chaplains, like, how will we care for our families in a major war? That's huge. Part of it will mean, right now we're under an ethic that we've had since the Vietnam War: leave no one behind. We do what's called a dignified transfer. We bring the bodies home, right? And they're buried at home, and you get the remains back. In a large-scale combat situation, we will bury people at sea again. There will be no other option to do it. So we're involved in doing exercises and planning, and it's very, very touchy. This is not classified, obviously, because I would like to retire from the Navy. But you can tell this is a very sensitive topic, right? Very sensitive, right? It is the chaplain corps' job to hold the Navy's feet to the fire. It's like, you're planning for large-scale carrier operations against the PLAN, which is a weird acronym, People's Liberation Army Navy. That's the name of the Chinese Navy, right? You're planning for large-scale operations. We've got to talk about what happens, with our sailors. We owe that to them. In just war theory, it's called just post bellum. Like, what do we owe people after the conflict? So we're working on it. Got time for more? One more?
One more.
Okay. Or no more?
Nope,
One more.
There seems to be a resurgence or a real movement among young people toward Catholicism. Are you seeing that? I've got a 20-year-old son, and not in the military, but among his peers, there's just, which we're not Catholic, we're card-carrying Methodist, but hey, we embrace that desire to seek spiritual foundation. Are you seeing that same thing in the Navy amongst
Yeah,
sailors?
that's true. Not only Roman Catholicism, but within the Orthodox tradition as well. Here's Nathan Solomon's unofficial, 25-cent take on it. The Roman Catholic Church, the Orthodox Church, they never apologize for what they believe, right? Our chief of chaplains, who's an Anglican priest, right, is an admiral, a guy I've known for a lot of years. Admiral Cash encourages chaplains, like, and this is part of the spiritual readiness conversation, talk about the importance of faith, right? A Roman Catholic priest has no problem telling you, dude, you got to come to Mass. You're wrong if you have not come to Mass and received the sacrament. But in vast areas of Protestant tradition, like, oh yeah, it'd be really great if you come back to church. Look, know that there's a lot going on in your life. You get kids. It's a travel ball, stuff like that, right? Right? We do that because, rightfully, we don't want to beat people up with faith. But sometimes, right, a lot of times, We have soft-souled faith. Like, you got to figure this out. I know you got a travel ball schedule. You people need to be in church. You need to be immersed in that community of meaning and purpose and value, or your soul is at jeopardy. Maybe not, you ain't doing it necessarily in the Baptist tradition. You're in danger of the fires of hell, but Jesus said, I might, because I am Baptist, but Jesus said, I have come that they might have life and have it more abundantly, right? That doesn't only mean what happens after you die. Like, abundant life starts now, right? So I commend people, I commend our chaplains, be bold in your faith, right? Roman Catholics and the Orthodox, they're bold in their faith. It's like, you need to do this. How long it's been one of my best friends replaced me in Italy, I think he was fated to be a Catholic priest. His name's Thomas Patrick O'Flanagan, But I've seen Tom, talk to Catholics like, what do you mean it's been like 3 weeks since you made your confession? You need to get right. He just like straight up tells them. I know where the Catholic guilt comes from, but the boldness to say what we do, our faith, it's really important. It might be the most important thing you do, and to act as if it is and not to soft sell it. So that's where I think that comes from.
Thank you. You will have an opportunity, if you would like to, at 10:30 at the Women's Club right behind us. And yes, the men are invited as well. And we'll have another 45 minutes of engagement, and you can ask your questions in a more intimate setting. Thank you so much for being here. He will also be preaching at 7 p.m. at Vespers out at the bandstand tonight. And we look forward to seeing you at any or all of our opportunities, and tomorrow